countdown timer. Here we go. Anyway, so welcome to another happiness class. This is the weekly thing. Do check out bigquestionsanswer.com if you can see it over there. Today we're going to be talking about the soul. Maybe that sounds really deep, but it's incredibly important. I'm going to try to make it feel really like logical in the sense that I'm going to start with the science and then I'm going to talk about feelings. Like, we're really confused about what makes us happy, and the soul is telling us what makes us happy, and the needs of the soul. What is it that you need to truly be happy? The second half of the show is about anything you want to ask about life, or some crazy topics to talk about. There's my cousin Shah Jahan down there. He's going to hopefully try to argue with me. We'll see what happens. Everything I've got to talk about is based on not what I've got to say, but ancient religious truth, science, and logic. So you don't have to believe what I've got to say. Hopefully, it will make sense. It'll be logical and be scientific. So let's go for it. First slide, copy paste it. It's on the way. The science of the soul. All right, let's see how well I can explain this. So, what is the soul scientifically? So, as I say, this is not supposed to be just from me. These are from all sorts of ancient religions, giving kind of the direction for what I've got to say. So here's a part of the Holy Quran. And the Holy Quran, so I say all religions are connected, and I pick different religions, but mostly the Quran for specific reason. But anyway, and I do call to witness, the Quran says, the self-accusing soul, that the day of judgment is a certainty. So it kind of sounds really weird if you just pick a verse by itself, and it's like poetry, kind of to think about it. But here's a quick commentary. God first gives you respect. So when you say a call to witness, it's from Arabic, and the sense that you get from the Arabic is I respect you when you begin this fault-ridden journey towards goodness. So, like, you've got an self-accusing soul that's telling you messed up, okay? But God still values that. Like, you've become more than an animal. You're not just going through your instincts. You're thinking about yourself, and you're thinking, what should I be doing with my life? And that has great value, even if you don't really see it as that much very valuable. So that's a quick commentary on that. But let's talk about lots of weird stuff you might not have heard of. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the birth of the soul. So, and I'll get my cousin Shah Jahan to get some reactions or thoughts about it in a second. So, you'd be surprised that you go through 2 deaths by the time you come into this world. I'm just going to talk about the first death. In fact, I've talked about the 2 deaths as a proof of the afterlife, right? So, what happens when the sperm fertilizes the egg? It actually explodes. It has to die. The sperm has to die to enter the egg. So the sperm is some really basic form of life, right? But to get to the next stage, which is get into the egg and start dividing and eventually growing into a human being or like a baby inside the belly, that's a whole different level of existence. And it has to die to do that. So it has to die, and it literally explodes. In fact, the scientists who have talked about this are mesmerized by how it happens, because you get a flash of light when this happens, right? Okay. And some inner essence of the sperm gets into the egg, and that's kind of the first kind of hint as to what is going to happen to us. We go through a death, but we see it as a death because our shell disappears, but something else continues, and that something else takes us to the next higher level of existence. So I don't know, just any thoughts about that? Does that sound really weird? Have you ever heard something like that before?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I've heard something about that. I thought that the the sperm has, I don't know, nucleus or something inside it. This is like trying to remember year
It's got
nine
some,
biology. It's
yeah,
got something,
yeah,
and then it hits the egg, and the white, everyone knows the image is like a little thing with a tail. The whole thing goes, and then the
yeah,
nucleus goes into the egg. So that's actually quite. I never thought about it like that.
yeah.
That's an afterlife for the sperm, you can say.
That's right, right? And it's
Mm.
completely new existence that beyond the imagination of that sperm, right? Okay,
Yeah.
and that's not the end of it. So the Quran actually talks about more. It talks about the detailed development of the egg itself. And there's a scientist who first looked at it and he was amazed that the Quran talked about it, and he converted to Islam when he heard that, because like it's impossible for human beings to know that, right? Okay, and then it continues the Quran describing the development. It says halfway through the pregnancy is when the sperm, sorry, not the sperm, the soul is born as a product of the body, right? And that's actually when the fully first time the fully formed heart begins to beat. Okay, and that's actually brand new information. That's just I was just checking it up. It's like only known since last year or 2 years ago. So there's so much we're finding out, and it's when yeah, so that's a rough idea. This is just the birth of the soul, and the point of talking about it only is to give some sort of sense of reality of this idea called the soul, because I don't want it to be, I'm trying to get across that it's not a wishy-washy religious idea. It's kind of like it makes sense, right? And there is another death, but I'm not even going to go into that because that was kind of like the proving the afterlife, right? Okay. Anyways, any thoughts? I don't know. Is that really weird? You don't have to
Are you
agree.
saying that the Quran is saying that the soul is made halfway through the birth
The
cycle,
pregnant. Yes.
pregnancy cycle? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. At 20 weeks,
At the same,
basically.
and then we found in science that the heart is formed halfway through, and you're putting the link between those two.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like the kind of not the 100% the most important thing, but yes, the fully
Mm.
formed heart is beating first at 20 weeks. Okay, so
Okay.
people might notice some sort of murmur, like a doot, doot, doot of a baby, even at 6 weeks or something, but that's not really a heart. It's kind of like it's a thing that will become a heart later on, but it
Mm.
kind of has a rhythm of some sort. But anyway, that's the rough idea. But more interesting than that is part two. So you got little thing down there. Number one, birth of soul. Number two, where the soul is. Now, I'm not sure even if that's the right question. That's going to summarize what I'm going to say, right? But now I'm going to go into psychology. And so this self-accusing soul is basically your conscience, right? It's a thing that tells you when you're doing something wrong or right. Now, again, that might sound some sort of wishy-washy spiritual idea, but have you ever heard of Freud, psychologist?
Yeah.
Right, so he's somebody who recognizes these really weird thing called a conscience. In fact, lots of psychologists recognize as core part of psychology. And this is the weird thing that he came up with that a lot of psychologists accepted, is that there's sort of the conscience is not some sort of mechanical thing that just comes from the brain. It seems to have its own personality, right? And the way we know that, the reason why they kind of developed this idea is that you've got all these different things, that different parts of your thinking that are separate from your own thinking. So you've got this conscience which tells you, like, you want to do something bad and your conscience is telling you off from it. It's like a separate personality. This is something Freud has come up with, right? So again, this is a recognized, so I'm coming from science, then I'm going to psychology, and all I'm trying to get across in this first section, which is why it's called science there, right, on the side, is that there's a real reality that science, and if I call science part psychology part of science, which is just following facts, basically, there are more facts after facts that really support this idea of a soul. So I don't know.
Mm.
What are your thoughts? There's a personality separate from your own thinking that tells you off, and it's called a conscience, and that's basically what the Quran describes as soul.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, actually, you'll know about this. I'm sure that you just decided not to go into detail because of the time. But Freud mentions the iceberg theory, isn't it? So you have an iceberg,
All
and
right.
you have the tip
Did
of
you
it,
study
as you can
psychology? Because I don't know enough about it. You know more than me a little bit. That means.
Yeah, I did it. I did it at
Yeah. Okay.
A level and a little bit at uni. So you have an iceberg normally in
Yeah.
the sea, and as you
Yeah.
know, there's like that much of it above the
Yes.
sea, and then a
Typical.
massive part we don't see underneath. So that's how he
Yes.
described the mind. So that's our conscious, then our
Ah,
subconscious,
tip
and
of
then
the
there's a massive
iceberg.
unconscious, which is 90%. So if you're to go with that and liken it to the soul, I suppose you're saying that what we know is only 10%, and there's our soul is driven behind the rest, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know how
it's quite a
you
mysterious
read it.
thing. Okay, have you heard of Viktor Frankl? He's another famous psychologist, wrote Man's Search for Meaning.
No, maybe if you said some of his stuff, it might ring a
Basically,
bell.
he's a Jewish guy, survived the Holocaust. Okay, very
Mm.
famous psychologist. And basically, he says this is part three what the soul does. It's the thing that you have to listen to if you want to be happy. So, what he was coming across is like the only way you're really going to be happy sounds really weird for a materialist, modernist person, right? Is that you can have meaning in your life. Everything else doesn't really make you happy. And the way you know what to do is by listening to your soul. That's the short version.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah, sounds legit.
yeah. Anyway, so I do like to remind people, do check out the description where I literally have lots of links to all these things I'm referring to, like Viktor Frankl's book and all this kind of stuff, right? So if you want to check it out yourself. So yeah, that was just kind of a quick intro to give some sort of sense of reality of what I'm talking about. But now all these happiness classes are not supposed to be theoretical, right? That just science bit was just to give you a feel of what's going on, right? But like if you this is all about how do you become happy? What are your feelings based on? Okay, and that's what I want to talk about, right? And what's it got to do with soul? So I do like to, post a little question. So this is the feelings subject. So you got a little feelings title there, and it says, what's the link between the soul and happiness, right? And uh, again, a verse from the Holy Quran, and I have not created the powerful and the normal people. This is my simplified translation, but that they may be at one with me, right? There's kind of weaker, I mean, more direct translations, but they're not really helpful, I think, right? Okay. So that's again from the Quran. And basically it's saying, in short, commentary, it says, it is a self-evident truth, if you reflect on life, that you are made for progress towards beauty, which is goodness. So that's quite a hefty thing to contemplate on, right? But we seem to be attracted to beauty, like we like nature, we like beautiful things, right? And we're happier. This is another thing. I don't know if you study this in psychology. We're happier when we do good things. We want to be good people. Even Hitler, he didn't say I'm a bad bloke. He said I'm your
Mm.
savior to the Germans, right? Right.
Mhm.
So anyway, any thoughts about that before we kind of go deep into where the soul is or something?
No, nothing more than what you've added. I was going to say that exact same Hitler thing, but I left
Cool.
it. I'm joking. I wasn't. No idea. I learned that for the first time.
All right, okay. The soul is where happiness lives. So I'm going to come at this with a different angle. So there's kind of these different ideas and theories, maybe in the back of people's head, that maybe happiness is sort of some chemical thing, right? So I'm going to come up with different angles and how it's not true, and how what is the soul needs and stuff like that. I'm just coming up from all sorts of different angles, right? So I'm just going to look at my notes just to make sure I don't kind of miss out things. So first of all, I like to start off with the idea is that we're not good at happiness. This is why I do these happiness shows. That's why there are so many self-help books out there, so many people searching for happiness, depression on the rise, and it's nothing to do with being too poor, right? Really affluent people are taking drugs and stuff like that. They're not really happy. So there's something that we're missing. We don't understand how feelings work, is basically what I'm getting at, right? Okay. And so some people think it's just chemicals in our body, right? And but we know it's not that, because when we artificially try to make happiness through drugs, for example, and all sorts of things, you could say sugar, food, all sorts of things, but let's go to extremes of like drugs like alcohol, right? Alcohol is like one of the most popular drugs to basically feel happy, right? Those drugs are actually called depressants, right? Have you ever heard that before?
Yeah.
Alcohol,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Because what happens is when you try to get a high artificially, chemically, okay, your body does a thing called homeostasis. It tries to regain balance, and it goes the other way and it makes you depressed. Have you ever heard of homeostasis? It's not, I'm not doing a test, but I just thought, oh, okay, I didn't know
Yeah,
you know
I've
about.
heard of it, but if
Yeah,
you had asked me before your definition, I wouldn't have been able to say what it
sure.
is.
It's just not a test. It's just that you mentioned that, like, oh, I did that at university. I was like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, don't hold me
Anyway,
to it now. I won't remember anything.
okay, but there's lots of really interesting things that the chemicals do. So, for example, dopamine, you might have heard of it. Okay,
Mhm.
but like people just think dopamine just makes you happy, but actually it makes you happy in very specific situations, and that is when you have a plan to achieve something and you're working towards that, and the goal you're achieving that goal, you get dopamine. So it's really
Mhm.
interesting, right? So it looks like the body is giving you a reward of a high when you act according to some sort of plan. Okay, then there's oxytocin, right? And that is sometimes known as, I think, the bonding chemical, right? But when you shake hands or give hugs or whatever, you connect with another human being, you get that. So it's like, oh, the body's saying that's a good thing, well done, pat on the back, you know, I'll give you a chemical high for doing that. So you can't directly create, if you try to directly create the chemicals, you get messed up if you artificially do it, right? You know, take drugs or whatever. But if you do good actions, then you get the chemical highs as a reward. Okay, so these are kind of clues as to what you should do, on top of what psychologists have noticed, like Viktor Frankl was saying, like, you know what, if you do the right thing, if you have something meaningful in your life, you listen to your conscience. He actually says that, listen to your conscience, then you start finding happiness. And so we've already said, according to the Quran at least, your conscience is your soul. So, like, listen to your soul. What is your soul telling you? Your soul is telling you to do meaningful things, to do good things. I'm just going to stop talking for a second. I mean, just any thoughts about that?
Um,
It's quite a lot to,
could
I don't
you
know.
could you
Go on.
argue that it's all personality based? So when you say good things, good is subjective, right? So my our parents will raise us to say, give to charity, and we
Yeah,
learn then that giving charity is a good thing. We give
yeah,
charity and we feel good. And you can argue there's no existence of the soul. And equally,
sure.
again, through society and environment, if my parents taught me that murdering people was a good thing and they were nutters, and I
Yeah,
did that, to me, I'm going to feel good because the environment I've been brought up in has taught me that. So the
sure.
soul being a perfect thing that always guides you to the right path perhaps doesn't exist. And environment is all it is in the end. Could it
Sure.
be?
So this is something that psychologists have said is universal. Like,
Mhm.
like, okay, let's say your parents tell you murdering is good, right? Okay, but at some point, at some, so your soul has, or your conscience has a very short vision of what is good and bad. It can just look at what's put in front of it, and can say yes, good or bad, right? It doesn't have a long-term, deep understanding of what is good, right? It can't.
Instinctive, you're saying,
Yeah,
essentially.
it's kind of a short vision of what is good and
Mhm.
bad. So if you place two options, you'll be able to choose from it, right? Okay,
Mhm.
and so if you were told, your parents tell you murdering is good, at first you might say, okay, I listen to my parents, but after a while you'll notice the person is dying, they're crying, bad stuff is
Mm.
happening, right? And you
Yeah,
begin to
yeah.
feel, and eventually you realize murdering is bad. So I think it kind of plays out, right? And so that,
Okay.
yes, I think you're kind of pointing to another complicated thing, which is the definition of good and bad is actually incredibly complicated, right? But your conscience has some sense of what is good and bad, and that is why your conscience by itself is not good enough to tell you perfectly what is good and bad. So your conscience can't tell you what is a healthy thing to eat, for
Right.
example,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
that's what religion does. Religion says, you know what is healthy for you is don't eat pork because there's like bad, it has a short
Mhm.
digestive system, which means there's toxins in the body. Your conscience doesn't know all this complicated stuff, right? But
Yeah.
that's kind of the benefit of religion. So the religion kind of basically says, we have a dim sort of light, so we can see to some level, light as in inspiration, right? Okay,
Mhm.
guidance, right? But you need the real light from God to give you a better understanding of what's happening, what to do, kind of thing. So
Mhm.
you can't 100% depend on that thing, your conscience. Like, it can't take you all the way. But if you got, like, God gives you two options, like be kind to neighbors or not to be kind to your neighbors.
Mhm.
Go deep down, being good to your neighbors is a good thing, right? That kind of
Yeah.
stuff, right? So, what are the last things I want to quickly say about that? So, yeah. So, one of the other things that I'll quickly squeeze in is the idea that there are very careful limits as to what makes us happy. So if we try to exceed those limits, we get really depressed. So if we try to find too much happiness through one particular thing and it's meaningless, we have a small bandwidth, right?
Mhm.
And then we get really depressed. That's why drugs, you try to exceed the happiness limit,
Mhm.
you get unhappy, right? So in short, there's a third dimension, which is what your soul wants, and that's called depth. There's high, low. That doesn't really make
Mhm.
you happy, but what makes you really happy, and this is what Viktor Frankl was kind of pointing out, was depth, something deep. So if you kind of think, through your own experience, it's these really small things that actually make you happy. And
Mhm.
those small things are not just because they're small. They're not, they don't make you happy because they're small. It's because somehow it has some sort of value, something good you did with it.
Mhm.
So whatever, right? Anyway, let's move on to the next thing. So needs. How do we know what the soul needs, right? So here's another verse of the Holy Quran. This day have I perfected your religion for you and completed my favor upon you and chosen for you Islam as religion, right? Commentary, to match the evolution. This is also an explanation of why I use Islam, right? As opposed to different religions, although there are truths in all different religions. God has not ignored humanity ever. But anyway, to match the evolution of humanity, God has always given guidance according to its capability. So now that the most detailed guidance for the soul has arrived in the form of Islam. So as the answer to the question, what does the soul need? A rough answer is religion tells you the details of what those things are, but that's just the claim, right? Okay, and hopefully when we go through different things, you'll go, all right, okay, that seems to work for the soul. So the soul needs your honesty to listen to it. So this conscience is really easy to ignore. It's like a really tiny whisper, right? And so the problem with ignoring it is people get depressed after a while. If they have meaningless lives where they simply plainly just enjoy themselves, and this is being borne out, right? Um, and there's a great guy, Jordan Peterson. He's really good at explaining this idea, and he's telling lots of young people, like, you cannot live a meaningless life. You will hate yourself for it.
Mhm.
Okay, it's just really weird. You can be super comfortable and really depressed. Okay, because it comes back to this idea that you need to do something meaningful. You need to do something that is not even easy necessarily, actually challenging. It's like, lifting a weight. Imagine
Mm.
you got massive biceps and you're lifting 2 grams. It's not gonna, like, you're not using that body, you're not using your
Mm.
soul, right? So I don't know if I've got anything else to say about that first point. Let me see. The soul needs your honesty. So yeah, so I'm going to I like this word that Jordan Peterson uses about chaos, right? Okay, if you live your life sort of randomly, it's effectively what we call chaos. It's just random things that are happening. And when you do random things, you get more and more random results. Like, okay, I'm not going to get married, for example, or I'm just going to do whatever I want, sort of thing. After a while, that randomness um, bites you in the backside, right? And so there's a need for so, and another sort of deeper answer to the question, what does your soul need? Because we hopefully recognizing that the soul is the thing that makes you happy, is some sort of order in your life. Now that sounds really boring, and that's kind of the next thing I want to talk about. So have I got the, let me see, what have I got there? The soul needs to know boundaries. So boundaries, yes, sounds really boring, especially in a materialistic society. We just want to have loads of fun. We want to do whatever we
Mm.
want. Why is religion telling me what to do? All these kind of boring rules. Where's that coming from, right? So what I want to say about that is, when we live in within these bounds, which sounds really boring, okay, um, and we're living within those bounds does not mean just being a vegetable, not doing anything. It's actually doing positive actions within those boundaries. So, for example, I don't know, uh, like having sex with somebody. You don't have sex with everybody, right? Okay. Why not? Because you start having all sorts of relationship issues and whatever, right? So the boundary is marriage, for example. Okay. So when you live a positive life within those boundaries, and those boundaries are what the purpose of religion is, to tell you what those boundaries are, how to live those lives, right? That life. That your soul feel kind of feeds off that good action and becomes more awake. So this is what people, for example, just coming saying whatever comes to my mind, but uh, people who are high on pornography, right, or alcohol, right, that's a kind of a level of chaos where they're randomly doing things, and when they stop, you know, let's keep it not 18 rated or X rated, right? Let's just say they stop doing what they do when they're looking at porn, right? What they find, this is a finding, this is a common finding, your level of creativity increases,
Mm-hmm.
right? Same with alcohol. Like alcohol is fun, right? Okay, I haven't drunk really, not much, right? Okay, but it's kind of like just experimental, just for the sake of, people wondering, right? um it doesn't it grows, makes you live a crazy life where it's not under control and you're not going in any direction. So you'll find people who are addicted to drugs and whatever, they get excited, but they feel like they're not moving forwards. And of course, they're not moving forwards because they haven't organized themselves. Like, if you want to learn, right, you can't be, high on drugs while studying, can you? I don't know
Yeah.
if this kind of makes any
Uh,
sense.
yeah, I
you
suppose.
It sounds really obvious, right? You need to have some sort of order to move forwards. And when
Mm.
you move forwards, it's not the same high you get from drugs, but you still feel really good. Like, oh, I learned that thing. I'm more aware of the world, for example. Like, I learned some science and whatever, and I can use that thing to develop my career or something else that I really want to do. So that's kind of the idea, that of living within boundaries with positive action is what the soul needs. It sounds really weird, and it actually makes you more creative as well. So I'll give you another
Mm-hmm.
quick thing, like Steve Jobs and lots of really famous creative people, right? They wear the most boring clothes. They wear the same clothes every day. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, right?
Yeah,
So really creative people are actually really boring in the rest of their lives. They need to do that because they're homing so much energy in their creativity. They're trying to not have what you call decision fatigue. Ever heard of decision fatigue?
I haven't, but it's in the name, I suppose. We just
Yeah, I
have too
suppose
many
it is.
decisions
Yeah,
and you just
we're
get
not
no
actually. Yeah,
creativity left.
we can't handle too many choices in our lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole very interesting thing in that. Anyway, so finally, the last thing I want to whiz through is, have I got it down there? The soul needs beauty. So we need boundaries, we need honesty, but we need beauty. So we're attracted to beautiful things, and this is actually part of psychology, that we're less depressed when you look at nature, for example. Have you
Mm-hmm.
ever heard of that? Did they teach you anything like that? I don't know.
No, that seems like a logical thing. I think if you ask most people, they'd say something like that, but I don't know. Like, I've never read it as a
Yeah,
thing.
I think some of these are kind of, they're not like standard part of psychology, but if you research, and there's so many things
Mm.
that you can find out about that, right?
It's
Anyway,
believable
uh,
what you say, yeah.
yeah, And so I'm going to try to in a few seconds, I'm going to try to say something like really deep, which is when you fall in love, you try to imagine that person as being perfect. Why would you do something stupid? Nobody's perfect, right? And it gives you a sense that we're looking for something that is perfect. And in short, that's not a very complete proof, but that's a short proof that we're in search of God. So is the when we look at nature, which is just a reflection of God's work. It's a pure unobstructed reflection of God's work. Anyway, it's always very ambitious to explain all this in a few seconds. Hopefully,
Yeah.
made some sense. I don't know. All right.
Yeah. That last point was very good. Where
Cool.
you try and find the beauty. So that's that's eye opening.
Cool. Appreciate that. It made sense. Good. And by the way, this is kind of like my first attempt because I'm gonna at doing this course, and I feel like I know I'm not going to explain things as brilliantly as I want to, and I'm going to repeat this course again and again and again, like until like I'm 80 years old, and hopefully by then I would have perfected it. But we will see. Right. So this is my first trial through this thing. So anyway. Why do religions tell us to worship God? So you had an interesting question. I don't know how many weeks ago it was. It was like, yeah, it was to do with, you said in the chat, and it was a really good question because it's not the first time I heard of it. In fact, I heard the same question like the same week, and I thought that question is going to be answered, right? And it was, and I kind of answered it in a like in one of the comments of earlier videos, but it was something like, why is it that we have as Muslims have to do so many things like pray and whatever, and some other people maybe they don't follow religion, they can get to heaven because anybody can get to heaven, but there's different levels of heaven and all that kind of stuff. But why all these things we have to do? Why like the praying? And it's like, why these hurdles basically? Okay, and so I want to kind of talk about that, right? And why do all religions talk about worship? What's worship all about? What's the value of that? Like, what does God need to be worshipped? That's a weird God if God needs to be worshipped. Like, what's the point? What's the value of the Almighty? Like, what does it bring to the Almighty if you put your head on the floor? Like,
Yeah.
right? I can't imagine it has much value to God directly, right? So anyway, so that's the question. Why do religions tell us to worship God? And here's a quote. And I've created the powerful and the ordinary. I've talked about this one earlier on. So they should be at one with me. And I'm going to talk about this idea of being at one, which I didn't really talk about in too much detail. And the commentary is everyone has been created with one purpose, that is to go on a limitless journey towards the light of God. So we like beauty, and that's kind of the idea between light. Light is the sense of beauty that God sort of emanates, so not physical light, right? Being at one with God requires reminding ourselves of God's existence. And that's praying. That's part of what praying is. So we don't get trapped in short-term goals. That's a brief idea of what I'm going to be talking about. So let me get into it. Number one, it says, who cares what the purpose is? If you want to live, and the answer is, in short, if you want to live well, listen to your designer. So I'll quickly look at some ideas. What did I have in mind when I was going to talk about this? Okay, looking at the old notes. Yeah, so as you study psychology and science and stuff, you'll be amazed by how we actually work rather compared to how we think we work. So we might think, it's news to most people that we need meaning in our lives. It's usually considered a joke. It's like, what's the meaning of life? 5 or something like that. I mean, you probably heard that sort of thing, right? Okay.
Yeah.
And most people think that's too serious a question. But actually, that's what we need. So most people have no idea what it takes to be happy. It's kind of the opposite of what they thought. Most people thought buy, computer games, spend all your time doing that, and you're going to be happy. But after a while, as you grow up, you kind of realize it doesn't work. Yeah. So the way I like to say is human beings are complex beings, and you really want to know what your purpose is or how to drive a human being is the way I like to put it. It's like, how does this machine really work to make you happy. And so that's why it kind of matters what that purpose is, and you find out what that purpose is. You can't, you're not the person who made yourself, so you can't really say exactly how it is that you work. Like, you can eventually, through science and data, realize it, but we're always behind with science, and religion has always been well ahead of what we actually need. It's a brief idea. I mean, any thoughts? You can contradict me a little bit, because there's a lot that I'm not saying.
Yeah, yeah. No thoughts. Say some more things, and I'll try and have some thoughts.
Yeah, so for example, we
Yeah.
think, if we go and get our Netflix subscription, right,
Mm,
that's all we need, we'll be happy. But actually, we end up being really depressed, because not that Netflix is depressing, it's just that it means that we do things like not talk to our neighbors, right? And then we might think, oh, talking to my neighbors, that sounds like a really boring activity, right? Okay. But then we're finding that depression is going through the roof. And the number one reason for depression is loneliness. In a city like London, where we're all packed like sardines together, right?
mhm.
We're so close, and there's social media, and we're all in contact, yet we're depressed, right? Because of
Yeah,
loneliness, the number one killer in the West. Crazy.
yeah. I can't contradict that. I can only agree. I think people are going for pleasure rather than happiness. And that seems to be probably the difference and where that depression comes from. You can almost say
Yeah.
hedonism, and it's pleasures rather than a true happiness, which is where you're mentioning where you need to find your purpose to find true happiness.
Yeah. And the words like pleasure and joy, it's like really confusing. It's like, but isn't happiness pleasure or joy? And it comes back to
Mm,
this thing where there's a narrow thing where we can go between highs and lows in like
mm,
in a one dimensional thing, but happiness is not even there. It's deep stuff. It's kind of like
mhm.
the next dimension. I don't know
Yeah,
if that makes
yeah.
any sense, where
No, no, it totally
meaning is
does.
that dimension. Cool. Okay,
Yeah.
so my next point is religion, especially Islam, count. So this is part of why worship is important. In religion, especially Islam, taking care of other people is the main part of worship. So often that verse of the Quran is plainly the one that I've got, hopefully down there, right over there. It's often just translated as worship, because it's really hard to translate Arabic into English, because the Arabic, like the word ibadah is the actual original word, is way more complex than just worship, right? But it's a starting point, actually, right? Okay, so yeah, so taking care of people has again been proved by sociologists, psychologists. I'm not sure what they are, but there's these things called TED Talks. Ever heard of TED Talks?
Yeah, yeah.
Right, there's one called How to Buy Happiness, like literally how to buy happiness, right? And the way you buy happiness, one of the experiments is, if you they measured buying coffee for yourself versus buying coffee for somebody else. Like, you've had
Mhm.
coffee loads of times, you don't need another cup of coffee, right? But
Yeah.
when you buy coffee for somebody else, that's just like connection. Like, that's a funny,
Mm,
cool thing to do. Like, if you put yourself in that person's shoes, like, oh, you know and yeah, so people love connections, completely underrated. We could give some examples of that. So cool, we got a little comment here. Does that include non-Muslims? Yeah, so all these things basically work for non-Muslims. Thanks, Alika. I feel like I've always been saying Alika, but anyway, Nika's a regular here. So all the things I'm talking about, this applies to all humans. And you kind of reminded me that this stuff is like, try it out, see if it really works. You don't have to believe in Islam, just like see if it works. Like, yeah, if it makes sense to you. So thanks for that question. That kind of helps me explain things. Oh, what's number 3? You can play games with community and has the same effect. Yes, so I'm not saying computer games are bad by themselves. I'm saying oh yeah, I was thinking of computer games, but it could be any games, right? Yeah. So that's right. So if there's some sort of, so there's different levels of happiness. So if you do something communal, that's great. That'll make you happy. And if you do something meaningful together, like maybe plant some trees, that'll make you even more happy. So there's different levels of that. So cool, good points there, like or Lika. Anyway, so the last thing I want to say about praying in the last few seconds praying, especially in Islam and including Christianity, now Alika's here because Alika's Christian, right? It's a communal thing. And the great thing about, first of all, like when you set a time to meet, and then you meet, and Islam is very regular about punctual about time and stuff like that, you get to meet, and then you get the feeling of spirituality. You get that sense, and that what that does, and I missed out loads of stuff which is in the description. Okay, do check out the web pages I've given, right? But in short, you get a regular high from spirituality by praying and by being together, that reminds you that material stuff isn't the only stuff that makes you happy. And so what, as a result, because you kind of self-educate by doing that, by praying regularly, and this is one of the few but many benefits of praying, is that you remind yourself how cool praying is, the spiritual feeling of it and community and all that kind of stuff, and then you don't overdo it on material things. And when you overdo it on material things, what happens is you make your whole life about material things, and it's a never ending, you never find happiness and need to find more and more expensive things. So there's a lot of benefits of praying, basically, and that's one of the reasons why it's really good for you. And there's gratefulness and all that kind of stuff, which is, again, people have found out that it's really good for you. Just want to look at this last comment here. But I read that reliance on the traveler and Sharia doesn't include non-believers. It says you should wage war against them. So
Is it alliance or reliance they're trying to say?
maybe, I think you're right. It must be alliance of the traveler. I don't know. Right.
But I think the gist of it is that apparently we're not meant to be nice to
Yeah,
non-believers.
but that kind of doesn't make sense because, for example, maybe Alika would know, there's like Prophet Muhammad has said, be really good to Christians. There's a famous pact which says never disturb a monk, and there's endless things in the Quran and stuff like that. So that kind of doesn't really make sense. But I'll quickly have, did I look at this already? Question 2, you shouldn't. I traded a lot of medical stocks and it takes 7+ years for a full vaccine. Oh, okay. We're on the next question. Great. I appreciate you doing that. Thanks, Alika. So I'll keep that up, I suppose. So why should you not trust COVID vaccines? And I think Alika is saying you shouldn't trust them, I suppose. For vaccine to reach out to general population. Not sure if I fully understand. Maybe you understand that. What do you understand from that comment, Shah Jahan?
I don't understand the medical stock. Well, I think she is Alika a girl's name?
I think she's a girl. Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, saying that
She said,
she's
yeah.
understood vaccines and how they work through medical stocks. Not how they work, but how they're rolled out. And she's saying for a new vaccine to develop, maybe they're saying it takes 7 years to get out to everybody from scratch. So the fact that we're only a few years in, the argument is that they can't have
it's
made an
not fully
effective vaccine.
experimented. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm guessing. I don't know.
Cool. Does that kind of sound right, Alika? I think Shah Jahan's got that. That kind of makes sense to me. So yeah. So I'll quickly start with.
All right. Yeah, 2 years isn't enough. So you're saying that's the fact that
cool.
yeah.
Cool. I just stick that on the screen. Yeah, and I basically agree with you as well. So, and it's not like hidden knowledge or something. It's officially the COVID vaccines are considered experimental. Anyway, so and let me quickly read this thing. And if you obey, I try to translate or get rid of the ancient stuff. Like if you, I'll change that. There you go. If you obey the majority of those on earth, they will lead you astray from the. I know it take too long, wouldn't it? Okay, from Allah's way, and Allah is an ancient name for God, right? Even Christians and Jews in the Middle East say Allah, right? Just means the one God, right? They follow nothing but mere conjecture, and they do nothing but lie, right? So basically, commentary again, beware of majoritism. I've made that word up, okay? It's the idea of going along with the crowd. It's comfortable, but leads to laziness when questioning your actions, okay? So this is at some point I'm feeling I might, be debating with Shah Jahan, because Shah Jahan believes in taking the vaccine, and he made a comment at least last time. So I'm hoping for a bit of a debate. Who knows, right? Okay.
Yeah.
But I want to give an intro. This topic is not just about taking the vaccine or not, right? So that's why I got a 0 stage, right? Which is the intro. The COVID vaccines have exposed how easily we turn into Nazis, right? And so it's like, what? Nazis? I'm going to bring in Alika's comments in a second. I'm just going to ask Shah Jahan some weird questions. Are you ready, Shah Jahan?
Mm-hmm.
Shah Jahan, are you a Nazi?
Well, I've taken 2 vaccines, so maybe just
No,
like the
but do you feel
Nazis,
like a no?
I
But
am.
you've used no. You're supposed to say no, but
No, no, no. I'm
okay,
not.
yeah,
I'm not a Nazi.
not last time we
It's
checked,
a
right?
public knowledge anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, no, this is my claim. 0, no, point 0 there over there. That I'm going to prove that being a Nazi is more common than you realized. Okay, so the second question is, are you a weirdo?
Do you want me to say no?
So,
I think I'm a bit of a weirdo. Yeah, I think I'm a bit of a weirdo. But for the sake of,
all
if
right,
you want me to say no for the
okay.
experiment, I'll
This is
say no.
this well, yeah. So I don't know how these kind of questions would pan out, right? That's why I'm going to
Mhm.
be doing these lots of times and see what happens next time in about a
Yeah.
year's time when I get back to this topic. But the point is that first of all, if we think about what Nazis are, it was a whole nation at one time. All Germans decided to become
Mm.
Nazis, and they accepted this idea of killing lots of Jews and stuff like that, right? And so, was it that suddenly all these people became evil? No, it's actually that we are more easily manipulated than we realize. And how we manipulated, we go along with the majority. So there's also some really weird and interesting facts we can say about human beings. For example, that we prefer to be miserable than to stand out. So we like to be part of a majority. That's another, psychological fact, right? So but beware of following the majority, because they will lead you away from the truth, right? Because most people just have random half-baked ideas. They don't really think deeply about their lives. That's just the nature of things, right? Okay. And following them is not a good idea. And also it can lead to all sorts of evil sort of dictatorship. So if you are someone who's led by other people, and I'm going to try to get some of Alika's comments in, it's not going to turn out very well. And so if there's a good leader or a powerful leader like Hitler, right, and he can control some of the masses, you're just going to go along with it. And it's really hard to go away from that idea. So that's kind of the intro. There are a lot more kind of important things I feel like I kind of need to talk about with that. But
Mhm.
what is the one thing before I move on that I was going to say? Um, so, we undervalue the importance of not of actually thinking for yourselves, and we have all sorts of excuses like it takes too much time to think. But if I was to just summarize in a few seconds, because time's already running out, um, it has been proved by psychologists through things like the Milgram experiment. Ever heard of that one?
I
The
was just thinking of that. I was
electrocute,
about to mention that. Yeah.
right? That you can be tricked or into killing people really easily.
Mm.
Okay. And the people who don't do that have got really strong moral values. That's the short version, right? You got to be really strong. You got to really think for yourself. And it's ordinary people that do the killing, right? So just following the majority is a very dark path. Okay, is all I'm going to
Mm.
say about that for now, right? But there's a lot more we could say about that. Okay, so let's get into the facts. I'm sorry I didn't even give you much time. This is terrible. I'm going to make it 2 questions. Let's make it 2 questions, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to spend another 10 minutes on this, right? Okay, so immunity does not reduce spread. Okay, let's prove that, right? because the whole point of taking these vaccines, and I'm going to click on some of your comments, like in a second, right? To be fair on you as well, we'll get your points into the conversation. We know, for example, so the whole point of taking the vaccination is not really just to protect yourself, but to protect older people, right? I think. Do you agree with
I
that,
think
right?
people,
Like,
yeah, I know where you're going, and I think
or
I'll
sick
probably
people,
agree with your
or
point, but I think that's the general idea that might be
yeah,
becoming
because for
untrue.
example, like in Denmark, not Denmark, and some other countries, like you've had 0 deaths from kids. Like it just
Mhm.
doesn't happen, right? Okay. So let's look at I don't. One simple thing I want to suggest to you is that if kids are super spreaders, have you heard of that? Like
Mm-mm.
they're okay. Maybe because I'm a teacher, right? So we know there's all these statistics going between the teachers. Like COVID would go through the roof in terms of infection rates as soon as schools would open, right? They're
Okay.
super spreaders, because one of the reasons why they're super spreaders. Let me just kind of explain that. And let me see, paste that back in again. There we go. All right. Okay. So it kind of clears automatically. So one of the reasons why logically kids are super spreaders, because they don't die or get sick, and their immune systems are so amazing, right? Okay, they don't even show that they got COVID, and they're just giving it to each other,
Mm-hmm.
right? So here's the logical thing I want you to think about, and tell me what you think, right? So if incredible immunity from kids means that they spread the virus more, what would be the benefit of increasing your immunity through a so-called vaccine that would not reduce your spread? Like, we've got a demonstration of it not working. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, is the goal, assume that the vaccine is effective, right? And I think most people agree that is experimental at the moment and it's not, it might not be effective. Assume that it's 100% effective. Does that mean that you 100% won't get COVID, right?
It
Because
means
kids
that,
being
yeah,
immune,
yeah,
the
yeah.
point I'm
So
trying to make, sorry, is that,
yeah,
yeah, kids aren't 100% not getting it. They're just less likely. So they're trying to get to with the COVID vaccine, that's supposed to say that get you as close as you can to 100% until we can eventually get it to 100% in 10 years, whatever it is.
cool.
So
Okay,
by doing
so
that, you're putting your effort in to reduce your spread, I guess.
cool. Okay, so if we focus on just the spreading thing, we can see that it doesn't really affect change of the spread. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but why would you give, so giving the argument, okay, so now we're going to a different argument, which is actually the idea is actually to make people immune through this COVID vaccine, right? But why would you target lots of people who basically don't get sick, especially kids?
Yeah, I can't even pretend to disagree with that one. I don't get why kids
Yeah,
are doing it. It
right.
doesn't make any sense.
Cool. Okay. So, and by the way, even if you disagreed, it would be cool, right? It'd be like, okay, let the viewers decide. Anyway, now I have not
Mm.
I've been ignoring Alika. Let's get through. I think we've done that one, maybe. Have we? What are the ones out here? It became the norm.
I think you
Uh,
addressed the 2
is it?
points. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Maybe there's somebody else there. Wanna become Oh God, I'm not supposed to share that one.
Oh, let's discuss that.
No, not really. I think that's just some spam, basically. I get a lot
Yeah,
of
yeah, it
spam.
looks like it.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I'll block that one as well. Okay. All right. Okay. So have I blocked that one? Okay. All right. So anyway, so the next thing is, again, just an idea to put to you, right? Is experimental GM drugs, so genetically modified drugs, from companies with a record of selling dangerous drugs. That's a weird sentence there. Let me explain that one. So,
Mm.
first of all, the vaccines are genetically modified, right? And so just before the pandemic, we were incredibly scared of things like anything genetically modified. We were run a mile from. Like, ever heard of Monsanto?
No.
Oh, okay, like they were like one of the most. Maybe it's been 2 years and they haven't been made fun of for like for 2 years, but they were like one of the number one evil companies out there, because they were the
Mhm.
ones who basically planted genetically modified food. Like, do you have you ever eaten genetically modified food? Is that something you go out to do?
I don't know how prevalent it is. Is it something that we just don't have in our supermarkets? Then I thought a lot of it is.
Okay, so
Is it
basically
not?
it's the opposite of organic.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, but doesn't that if I go to the shops, I have
Mm,
to pay a little bit extra for something organic. If it doesn't
yeah.
say organic, do we assume that it's genetically modified, or is it rare?
There's kind of different ranges, like how badly
Right.
you treat the animals, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Honestly,
there's two.
I don't care about it. So I would eat genetically modified because if it looks like an apple, whatever it is, I'd have it.
Sure.
I think that's the thing. I just start to just sidetrack a little bit.
Yeah.
I think the loud majority that maybe anti-vaxxers are hearing are the ones that are being authoritative with it and saying you must, and the governments. I think, okay, I'll say for my age range, I'm 28. I think for
Sure.
low 20s to mid 30s, even up to 50s or 60s, I don't think we're being heroes or stopping immunity. I think the government has made it that we have to have a vaccine to go abroad. We have to do this, and I think that this vaccine is not going to kill me. I don't think there's anything sinister that they're implanting 5G in me and I'm going to have like a third arm coming out my neck tomorrow. I think it's their attempt. It's probably not going to work or be that effective, but I don't care enough. It's like MasterCard. Everyone in the world use MasterCard. Do you care? Do you think there's any? It doesn't matter, does it? It doesn't matter that the whole world does it. You just need to pay for your stuff and carry on with your life. So I don't think there's anything sinister with it. I think it's an attempt, and it's probably a poor attempt, and maybe it'll get better in 5 years. That's what my thing is with anti-vaxxers. It's more
Mm,
like a statement on lifestyle, but I don't think taking it is a big deal. I'm wrong.
cool.
I might wake up with 5 arms. Who knows one day? I don't know.
Okay, yeah. So organic food costs at least £1 more. So we're quite big on organic food in our
Hmm.
household, especially since we went from the Middle East, where we actually had a lot of our own growing our own food and stuff like that. And we lived around farming areas where you could see the terrible stuff they did to food
It's
before it
expensive there,
got to
doesn't it, in
people.
the Middle East?
Uh
Produce.
Depends. So I was in Jordan, and
Oh, okay.
Jordan is a whole different ball game. It's
Mhm.
incredible. Like, you could have lunch for £1, and it would be brilliant.
Oh, I meant
That kind
like
of stuff.
fresh things, like
Oh no, fresh,
milk,
fresh.
tomatoes.
Oh,
Oh, really?
no, milk is
Fruit
expensive
and veg.
because
I always remember fruit and veg when I went to Dubai and
they had.
Saudi. They were crazy expensive.
Oh, okay. So tomatoes. Jordan is one of the biggest tomato developers or growers in the world, or something.
Ooh.
Somehow, I don't know how. Anyway, but yeah. Anyway, so the idea is that we were really scared of GM. Maybe it's been 2 years and it's been wiped out people's memory, right? And a lot of people don't realize that these drugs, or so-called vaccines, I don't really call them vaccines because they don't really work like vaccines. Like a normal
Mm.
vaccine, you take it, that's the end of the story. You don't have to take it every month. You don't need boosters and no such thing in normal vaccines, right? So call it a drug, but if you want to get more people to take it, you call it a vaccine. That's kind of the marketing, right? But on top of that, it's like people seem to be unaware that it's genetically modified, and genetically modified, incredibly dangerous. And maybe I'll just talk about that just quickly. The idea of genetically modified basically means, like, human beings are made of incredibly complex code called DNA. Like, we've got no idea how complicated it is. It's an incredibly complicated computer program. Anybody who's done computer programming will know, you mess up one line, you mess up everything. You're big trouble, right? And loads of people have died through genetically modified things. Yeah, there's lots of crazy stuff that has happened in the past, but it's kind of been uh, kind of banned from social media, the whole discussion about it, right? But genetically modified. So it's crazy that we've gone from a stage from before the pandemic, we thought genetically modified stuff was really dangerous, and now we're having it injected in our arms, and everybody's happy about it as if it's no big deal.
Quick counterpoint. I have to
Yeah,
jump
go
in
on,
because
go
it
on,
sounds like we're
go
a
on,
minute.
go on, go
I
on, go on.
secretly Googled in the meantime because I wanted
Yeah,
to find out.
yeah.
Quick Google says roughly 60 to 70% of processed food in grocery stores contains at least some GM ingredients. So my argument is that I think all of us have GM stuff. There might be a scare, just like to say don't have too much sugar, But again, I think it goes to that thing that people just don't care anymore. If they need something, they'll do it. So if they need to have the vaccine, I reckon you'll come round one day. I think if you need to go to Jordan and they say even 5 years time from now you have to have the vaccine,
You
I reckon
never
you'll do
know.
it.
You
Yeah,
never know. Yeah, no, I don't
yeah,
discount it completely, right? It's possible, right?
mm,
But there are lots of cases, lots of people
mm.
suing the government at the moment because of all their
Oh,
side
really?
effects, which is not allowed. You don't hear it because it's banned from mainstream
Hmm.
TV. You're not even allowed to say it on YouTube and all this kind of stuff.
Oh, okay.
There's a lot of silencing of different people, like
Yeah,
whatever. Anyway, so why are governments not? So here's another just kind of a sign. I don't want to go to too many times. We cut. I'll make my last point, which is why.
yeah.
So obesity is the number one. Oh, it's really the end. I thought it was. I thought I had another go at it. Obesity is the number
Mhm,
one factor of determining if COVID will kill you. So people don't really die of COVID directly,
mhm.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
It's obesity is the number one. It's just a known fact, right? Why isn't the government saying, lose your weight? You don't hear that. That just proves to
yeah.
you
That's
that
true.
they don't care.
Yeah, yeah. I do think 100%. I think especially the pharmaceutical companies. I think even people that take vaccines would agree. It's money making, right? And now that their first quarter of 2020 must have been the most profitable ever, they're going to go to their board of directors and say, "Here are our numbers." They're not going to say, "Okay, go back down to making tens of billions left." They have to keep creating boosters and boosters and keep it going.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's a bit sinister up there.
So cool. But there's always more to say about this topic, but I
Mm,
really appreciate Shah Jahan taking out time after work and all that kind of stuff. Really cool of him. Appreciate Alika, as usual, jumping in. That was awesome. And anybody else is watching, hopefully you enjoy the show. Do you join us next week? Please press that like button. I think it helps more people see the show. And until next week, peace be upon you. Have a great week.
all right, so
Thanks, Tom. Just hang in and I'll press the